Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this edition of The Pulse. I am very excited to be here today, and we have a very special guest, Miss Pam Haley, out from Spokane Valley. She was just reelected as the mayor there. So thank you for sitting down. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Right. So what are your sentiments coming into this next term? I know you've only been reelected for about 3 weeks-ish now. It was in January was the reelection. So what are your sentiments coming into this term?
So coming into this term is a little bit different. We have the ARPA money that we're looking at. As the city of Spokane Valley, we only got 16 million, which compared to the city of Spokane, which is I think around 100 million,
Hmm.
is a big difference. And what we're finding is that there's bigger asks. So when we had the CARES money, we were able to give so much to small businesses, so much to citizens who needed help with rent or mortgage or utilities. And it went pretty well, but now we're having huge asks. So we have our 16 million and everybody wants all of it.
Hmm.
So it's going to be hard to kind of whittle it down and figure out who is going to get the money. And then the other thing too is I would like to see it something be transformational for the valley. I want something that generations from now, they know what we spent the money on. So, we've looked at low income housing. We're looking at maybe a public private partnership where we could do maybe home ownership for
Hmm.
those low income people. And that's what we're looking at. So it's going to be a challenge for sure.
Right. And I know that Spokane Valley, a lot of people kind of lump Spokane together, who people who aren't
Mhm.
from Washington or maybe even are from Washington. And I think of Spokane Valley and Spokane as like this community that's together. But recently, the valley has been kind of separating off and growing a lot. So that money is a really big deal. Do you want to explain what that ARPA money is to people who may not know what it is?
So it's the American Recovery Plan. It's basically to try to bring people back from COVID and to give some money to be able to do things. The difference between ARPA and CARES is that ARPA we can use for things like low income housing where we couldn't for CARES. So it's opened up a lot of avenues to use the money that I think will be really helpful for our citizens. And I think it'll make a big difference in people's lives. I mean, it made a big, CARES money made a big difference in people's
Right.
lives, but this is going to be, I think, more impactful.
Hmm. Money makes the world go around, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, so this being the first year after an election term, what do you see as your biggest concern going into these next 4 years?
I think one of my biggest concerns is public safety. We're seeing a huge increase in violent crime. And so I don't know that our police have the tools really right now to
Mhm.
deal with that. There's a lot of bills on the floor trying to kind of define what the bills from the last legislative session changed about policing. And I think they are starting to realize how the courts were looking at it and things like that. So they're kind of trying to fine tune it, which I think will give our police back some of the things that they had before that really helped, that were nonviolent, but made a big difference in their ability to keep citizens safe.
Mhm. So what is your administration in working with the council going to do specifically to put that concern at the forefront of your administration?
So I think that I work really closely with our sheriff
Hmm.
and also our police chief, who's Chief Ellis. And we're trying to come up with maybe innovative ideas and things we can do that would be different than what's been done before to try to address some of the crime that's different than it's ever been before in the valley. I know in the valley it used to be, we'd have a couple murders a year, and now it's a lot more than
Hmm.
that. You can see it in the news. There's shootings,
Right.
there's stabbings, there's a lot of things going on out there now. And so I think that so when you campaign, you doorbell. So you go door to door and you say who you are and what you're
Yep.
running for. And the biggest concern I had when I first started doorbelling, which you started in about May. So in May I started doorbelling and people were like, "Oh my gosh, the homeless, that's our big, thing. We need to deal with that." Sometimes it was like people are speeding down my street,
Sure.
things like that. But towards probably July, every single door I hit from July through November was crime. There's too much violent crime in the valley. So I think that made it a forefront of the entire council, not just me and
Hmm.
being the mayor. I think everybody is really concerned about it, and I
Hmm.
think that we do have a general consensus on going forward with that. That it's important.
That's good. I'm glad that there's some sort of agreeability that that's important because working together and being collaborative is kind of the way you're going to make change. We can't just like be at odds with each other. So
Yeah.
having that cohesion um, will be really good for creating legislation and enacting that legislation, being on the
Yes,
same page.
absolutely. I mean, I'm just one vote. There's six other people.
100%.
Yeah.
Right. How are you working with your council What's like, as in like, what's the relationship between the council? I know it's a bit of an open-ended, confusing question, but what's the relationship like?
So, the relationship's always been pretty good, really. We have a lot of differing views, but that's what makes a council, right? You want to represent all the people, and I think we do a pretty good job of that with the differing views and opinions on the council. For the most part, we've worked pretty well together. There are a few things that we're all just very passionate about, and we're not changing our minds for anything. So that's where we get some of that confrontation going.
Gotcha. How is the collaboration worked between you and the council so far? I know we've talked a little bit about violent crime, but going into other things as well, like how has that worked? Where have some hiccups maybe even come in?
Well, so one of the things that we discovered when I came on was that the previous council mayor did a lot of negotiating on his own for things that the council wasn't behind. And so I'm spending a lot of time kind of undoing those right now. Because unless the whole council's behind it, there's absolutely no point in us going forward with it at all. And so that's been kind of taking up most of my time. And Rod Higgins is my deputy mayor, and his time as well.
So I want to pivot a little bit more towards a specific issue. Violent crime does seem to be your biggest concern, but homelessness also has been pretty big. I mean, Spokane and then also the Valley as well. What is your administration doing or attempting to do to address homelessness on both the legislation side and enacting the policies that already exist?
So one of the things we are doing is looking at where we can put things. Where can we put? So we haven't been zoned for a homeless shelter. We haven't been zoned for a lot of things because the growth we're seeing is extreme in both homelessness and just population. And housing prices. So it's making people who maybe wouldn't have been homeless previously looking at where it might be.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the reasons I really want to look at affordable housing. And by affordable housing, I mean really affordable. Because I look now at some of the affordable housing and the rent's over $1,000 a month. Well, it's cheap for the valley, but it's not affordable. So what I'm looking at specifically is to try to come with something that is workable for people, especially those who are not currently homeless but are at risk of being homeless. Statistics show that the longer you're homeless, the more apt you are to stay homeless.
Yeah.
And so if we can help those who are kind of on the brink, I think that's a good place to start, just so that we don't increase the homeless population. And then, of course, we're also looking at Valley Partners is kind of our social service agency in the Valley. They have the food bank, they have homeless services, they have a clothing bank. They help people find jobs, housing, things like that. And we're looking at partnering with them in a much bigger way so that they have a little bit more money to deal with some of the problems and trauma that they're experiencing.
Gotcha. Yeah, something that you mentioned that was pretty interesting to me is the people on the brink of homelessness. Something that people don't realize is the way the housing market works is that people who are in like their starter homes, they'll move up to their secondary homes and maybe even a tertiary home eventually. When those people aren't moving up to those other houses, it doesn't clear space for people to get into those affordable houses. So they kind of stay on the street longer and longer, perpetuate that cycle. What's your plan to deal with now instead of homelessness? We're going to go to the other hot topic. What is your plan to deal with COVID? Are you just waiting to hear what Inslee has to say, or what's the council and your take on that?
I think we're pretty much in consensus on this too. It's time to kind of live with COVID. We need to stop the constant, you don't know if you're going to be open for business next week. You don't know if your kids are going to be in school next week. You don't know if your daycare is going to be closed next week. I mean, there's a lot of things going on with that. I think it's time to maybe be a little bit more transparent about how we handle that. You see a lot of other states have loosened up dramatically, and we don't seem to be doing that. So I think that that's something we need to start doing. I mean, at this point, I think we're all going to get it, right? Yeah. We can all accept that the vaccines,
if you haven't got it somehow,
yeah.
You're going to get it.
Yes, the vaccines aren't really working like they thought they would. Masking isn't working like they thought it would. You know, there's a lot of things that just aren't happening. So I think.
Yeah, even our next door neighbors have basically opened up completely. I mean, not even basically, just opened up completely, that being Idaho. Is there anything else that you think our listeners should know or anything else you'd like to share with them today?
I can't think of anything. Spokane Valley is an awesome place. I love it, and I'm happy to be representing it.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you have kind of a boring day today, but a busy day nonetheless. So
I do run a daycare, so it doesn't get completely boring.
I'm sure children running around and everything. But I want to thank you again for sitting down and giving us some of your time today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And to our listeners at home, thank you for tuning in to this edition of The Pulse and our special guest. I am your host, Connor Sundet.